just in. Canada takes a dramatic step that sends shockwaves through North American finance and global politics. According to official filings and regulatory disclosures reviewed recently, Canadian authorities have moved to block all Trump-affiliated business operations within Canadian jurisdiction. Bank access restricted, commercial partnerships frozen, licensing approvals halted. And the question everyone is asking tonight is simple but explosive. How did it come to this? In the next few minutes, we are breaking down three critical points you need to understand. First, what Canada actually did and what it carefully avoided doing. Second, how this move creates cascading financial pressure across Trump-linked enterprises, American markets, and cross-border trade. And third, why analysts warn this could trigger long-term consequences that extend far beyond one family name. This is not speculation. This is policy. This is leverage. And according to experts, this moment marks a turning point in how political power and economic accountability collide. Let's break it down. Here's what just happened. Over the past several days, Canadian federal regulators and provincial authorities initiated coordinated actions that effectively block Trump-affiliated businesses from operating normally inside Canada. This includes restrictions tied to corporate registrations, financing pathways, and active commercial contracts. According to publicly available records, the actions affect multiple sectors, including real estate licensing, hospitality partnerships, and financial service relationships. The timeline matters. These measures begin appearing in recent filings, following months of escalating trade and diplomatic friction between Ottawa and Washington. Specific numbers tell the story. Analysts estimate Trump-linked enterprises generate between $250 million and $400 million annually through indirect international partnerships. Canada represents a smaller slice, but a critical gateway. More than 30% of international financing channels tied to these entities route through Canadian institutions or subsidiaries, according to financial compliance experts. And it gets worse. Several Canadian pension funds and institutional investors reportedly initiated internal reviews recently, reassessing exposure to politically exposed entities following updated compliance guidance. That alone creates immediate pressure on liquidity and capital access. But here's where the story takes a personal turn. One Toronto-based commercial real estate consultant described the impact plainly. Deals don't die overnight. They suffocate slowly. That consultant works with mid-sized developers who relied on cross-border financing structures. Now, those structures are under microscopic review. For one small hotel supplier in Ontario, that suffocation is real. The supplier, who asked not to be named, depended on cross-border contracts tied to Trump-branded properties for approximately 40% of annual revenue. Payments stalled recently. Orders paused weeks later. Staff hours were cut by 25% shortly after. This isn't abstract policy. This is real economic friction by design. And the timing couldn't be more significant. These moves come as trade tensions between Washington and Ottawa reach levels unseen in decades. Prime Minister Mark Carney has publicly stated Canada will not tolerate economic coercion. President Trump has responded by calling the moves ungrateful and warning of consequences. The stage is set, the pressure is building, and the fallout is just beginning. So how does a country block businesses without announcing sanctions? This is where the mechanics matter and where most people miss the real story. Canadian authorities rely on regulatory leverage, not headline-grabbing bans, banking compliance reviews, enhanced due diligence thresholds, licensing reevaluations, procurement exclusions, environmental impact reassessments. None of these are labeled sanctions, but together they function as a financial choke point that's nearly impossible to escape. Here's the critical mechanism. When entities are designated as high risk under enhanced compliance frameworks, banks must apply stricter rules under anti-money laundering and know your customer regulations. That means slower transactions, higher collateral requirements, increased reporting burdens, and in some cases, outright service withdrawal. According to compliance analysts interviewed recently, transaction delays alone can increase operational costs by 12 to 18% within a single quarter. Data backs this up. A recent Canadian Banking Association report found that enhanced scrutiny measures reduce cross-border capital flow efficiency by nearly 22%. For businesses dependent on speed and scale, like real estate development and hospitality ventures, that's devastating. Cash flow timing matters. Miss a payment window by 3 days and penalty clauses trigger. Miss it by 2 weeks and partners walk. Now add precedent. Years ago, Canada applied similar regulatory pressure to foreign-linked firms during a major trade dispute involving steel tariffs. Within 6 months, affected entities saw revenue declines averaging 27%, even without formal sanctions. Some never recovered market position. Think of this like oxygen. A business doesn't collapse because someone flips a switch. It collapses because the air gets thinner, slowly, deliberately, until operations simply can't sustain themselves. But here's the kicker. These measures are extraordinarily difficult to challenge legally. They sit comfortably within existing financial law. They're framed as risk management, not punishment. They're defended as institutional prudence, not political retaliation. And that makes them incredibly powerful tools of statecraft. Let's look at the technical layers. First layer, banking. Major Canadian banks have introduced enhanced monitoring protocols for any entity with ownership links to politically exposed persons. That includes transaction pattern analysis, source of funds verification, and beneficial ownership disclosures that go beyond normal requirements. Second layer, licensing. Provincial authorities in Ontario, British Columbia, and Quebec have quietly updated approval criteria for foreign-linked commercial ventures. New applications face extended review periods, sometimes stretching from standard timelines to triple the normal duration. Existing licenses come up for renewal with additional documentation requirements. Third layer, procurement. Federal and provincial governments have updated vendor qualification standards. Entities with exposure to trade dispute-related parties face automatic exclusion from public contracts. That includes everything from construction bids to hospitality service agreements. Fourth layer, investment screening. Canada's Investment Canada Act already allows federal review of foreign investments. Enforcement has intensified. Proposed deals now trigger national security assessments more frequently, adding months to timelines and millions in legal costs. Fifth layer, public-private coordination. Canadian financial institutions operate in a highly regulated environment. When regulators signal heightened caution, even informally, banks respond. Risk committees meet, credit policies update, exposure limits tighten, cause and effect are clear, political escalation leads to regulatory caution leads to institutional risk aversion leads to capital retreat leads to operational contraction leads to workforce reductions and market exit. One financial analyst based in Montreal explained it this way: you don't need to ban someone if you make it impossible for them to operate profitably. That's the playbook Canada is running right now. And at this point in our analysis, we're reaching the moment where this pressure reaches its absolute peak. Because what happens next determines whether this is a temporary freeze or a permanent fracture. Let's talk about who absorbs the shock. Because when financial systems tighten at the top, the pain ripples downward, fast. First, American workers and families. Trump-linked enterprises employ thousands directly and indirectly across hospitality, real estate, licensing, and management sectors. When financing tightens, projects pause. When projects pause, contractors lose hours. One Florida-based construction firm tied to a Trump-branded development already confirmed delayed payments affecting 150 workers. Paychecks still arrive, but over time vanished overnight. Second example, hospitality workers in major U.S. cities. Seasonal hiring projections for Trump-branded properties have been revised downward by 15% for upcoming quarters, according to industry analysts tracking luxury property pipelines. That translates to roughly 800 positions across multiple states that simply won't materialize. Third example, maintenance and service staff. When properties operate under financial pressure, the first costs cut are discretionary services. Deep cleaning schedules extend, renovation timelines stretch, contractor rosters shrink, real people lose real income. Now, small businesses. Consider a U.S. marketing agency specializing in international branding for high-end properties. Canada-based contracts represented nearly 20% of its annual revenue. Those contracts are now under indefinite review. The agency employs 23 people. Staff layoffs are being discussed internally for the first time in years. One employee, a single mother of two, told colleagues she's already updating her resume. Another case study, a specialty furniture supplier in North Carolina that provided custom furnishings for Trump-branded hotel projects in Canada. Orders worth $1.2 million were placed recently. Within weeks, financing approvals stalled. The supplier has 30 days of operating cash remaining. The owner is exploring bridge loans at interest rates triple his normal cost of capital. Large corporations aren't immune either. Publicly traded firms with exposure to Trump-branded licensing saw intraday volatility following reports of Canada's regulatory moves. Companies that licensed the Trump name for products or developments faced analyst questions during earnings calls. Stock prices experienced fluctuations not because of ideology, but pure uncertainty. Institutional investors hate uncertainty more than bad news. One major real estate investment trust with mixed portfolio exposure saw shares decline 4.3% over several trading sessions before stabilizing. That's $340 million in market capitalization erased within days. International partners reacted quickly. European compliance consultants issued internal guidance warning clients to reassess exposure to politically sensitive ventures. One London-based advisory firm sent a memo to hundreds of clients recommending immediate legal review of any contractual relationships involving entities under Canadian regulatory scrutiny. Asian investment firms reportedly paused exploratory talks regarding North American real estate partnerships. One Hong Kong-based fund manager stated privately that reputational risk now outweighs return potential for certain branded ventures. Experts warn ripple effects could extend into banking, real estate, tourism, and even advertising sectors. When capital becomes cautious in one area, it becomes cautious everywhere. One economist summarized it bluntly: confidence evaporates faster than capital. And when confidence disappears, the damage multiplies exponentially. Projects that looked viable recently now face financing gaps. Partnerships that seemed stable suddenly require renegotiation. Long-term plans dissolve into short-term survival strategies. This is what economic warfare looks like in the modern era. No tanks, no missiles, just spreadsheets, compliance memos, and credit committees. So what are experts saying? And more importantly, what aren't they saying publicly? A former Canadian trade official stated publicly that regulatory actions reflect heightened institutional caution rather than political retaliation. Translation: this is policy, not theater, but read between the lines. Institutional caution doesn't emerge spontaneously. It's cultivated, signaled, and coordinated. A senior U.S. financial analyst who advises multinational corporations warned that prolonged restrictions could shave hundreds of millions off projected international revenue streams within months. That analyst added something more sobering. Recovery timelines in these scenarios typically span years, assuming tensions eventually normalize. Another expert, a professor of international economics at a major Canadian university, noted that once regulatory infrastructure expands, It rarely contracts quickly. In other words, even if political winds shift, bureaucratic momentum has its own timeline. Politically, reactions split predictably along existing fault lines. Some U.S. lawmakers accuse Canada of economic overreach and weaponizing financial regulations for political purposes. Canadian officials respond that all actions comply with existing law, international obligations, and prudent risk management standards. Both sides claim the moral high ground. Neither side blinks. One U.S. senator called the moves an attack on American business interests and demanded State Department intervention. A Canadian cabinet minister responded by stating that regulatory independence is fundamental to financial system integrity. Legally, challenges face steep odds. Courts in democratic systems traditionally defer to financial regulators on risk assessments, especially when national security or systemic stability arguments are invoked. That means relief, if any, comes slowly, sometimes taking years to wind through judicial processes. By then, business models have already adapted or collapsed. Short-term outlook? Over the coming weeks and months, analysts expect continued deal delays, higher financing costs, and gradual partner withdrawals. Entities caught in the middle will attempt workarounds, restructuring ownership, creating intermediary holding companies, or shifting operations to less scrutinized jurisdictions. Some of those strategies will work, many won't. Medium-term scenario depends entirely on diplomacy. Either tensions ease and regulatory reviews relax, or this pressure becomes the new normal. If normalized, rebuilding trust and access could take years. Financial relationships, once broken, require immense effort to restore. One trade policy analyst put it starkly, capital has a long memory and a short temper, and that's the real consequence here. Once capital reroutes, once banks find alternative clients, once investors find safer opportunities, once partnerships dissolve, it rarely returns easily. The path of least resistance becomes permanent. This isn't just about one family or one set of businesses. This is about how economic power is wielded in an era where borders matter less, but regulations matter more. Let's recap the three most critical points. Canada didn't announce sanctions, but it didn't need to. Regulatory pressure is systematically reshaping Trump-linked business operations across multiple sectors. Financial pathways are tightening, and the ripple effects are already hitting American workers, small businesses, and global partners. The key takeaway is clear. In today's world, economic power doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks procedural, bureaucratic, even boring, and that makes it even more effective as a tool of statecraft. So here's the question for you. Is this a justified risk management move by a sovereign nation or a calculated warning shot in a larger economic confrontation that's only beginning? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay informed on stories the mainstream media won't fully cover, make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon. Because in modern politics, the biggest battles don't happen on stages. They happen in balance sheets, compliance committees, and regulatory fine print. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.